If you're looking for a new way to support the podcast, check out Dubby.gg, an energy supplement company trying to make a difference. There you can use code SIDEMISSION for 10% off your order. Thank you to Dubby for sponsoring this episode, and we hope you enjoy.
Welcome into the newest episode of Side Mission. I, like always, am your host, Rusty Ellis, joined by just one of the boys, Matt Beck. And Matt, it's been a while. I'm not gonna lie, brother. It's been a while since we recorded an episode. I think Foam Stars was the last episode we recorded, actually, and that was probably about 4 weeks ago. So, if you're wondering where we've been tied up with some longer games that came out. Obviously, most recently, Rise of the Ronin and Dragon's Dogma 2 dropped. Princess Peach Showtime dropped as well, but if you're expecting an early episode on that, or if you're expecting a quick episode on that, hate to be the bearer of bad news, that's probably not coming for a while. Another game we've been playing is the game we're talking about today, which has vaulted to the top of my Game of the Year rankings for the early part of 2024, and that is Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, one of the most, I almost said overhyped, one of the most hyped up games of 2024, and really of the last couple of years, one of the most hyped up games after the success of 2020's Final Fantasy VII Remake. So Matt, I'll give you the floor first. Don't worry, we will give spoiler alerts before we go into everything, because believe me, there's a lot to unpack here. There's a great story here, there's a lot of great character moments, and believe me, just like you, listener, if you've played the game, Matt and I are going to try to make sense of just what the hell happened at the ending, because there's a lot to unpack. So, Matt, first things first, I'm going to ask you just a simple question. Did this game for you live up to the hype?
Yes, absolutely it did. The 4-year wait from the release of Remake to Rebirth was absolutely worth it. This game was just throwing everything at you left and right. It's answering questions, and it's stuck with such a traditional Final Fantasy combat. Not so much the turn-based, but what Remake did with the more action-based combat, and it just felt so good. It was just like picking up the control and playing Remake all over again, because of just how easy it was for me to ease back into the combat with the basic attacks, being hitting X, which slowed down time during battle, which allows you to either use items or use your spells. Just it was like just that perfect sequel, or I don't know, I guess I want to call this, what I've been seeing online, called a requel, which is basically a remake / sequel, but sequel to remake, so I'm just gonna stick to that for now. But yeah, everything is here and then some. Like this, remake was just a little bit more linear in how the chapters are chosen, and you just basically follow a set path. And here they introduced a more simplistic open world type of thing that is in sections. And I think it worked really well, honestly. They filled the worlds up with, all kinds of things to do, and it works really well. I mean, just for me, Rusty would say they're distractions for me from getting through the story. So, I mean, which is absolutely true. Because during the first open world section, I'm just like, okay, I see all these icons. I'm going to go do this and this and this and just skip that blue diamond. That's basically advancing through the story, because this game just does not stop giving you things to do and distracting you from just going through the story. It is so much fun. I loved it, especially when they introduced I believe it's called a crafting system, but it has a different word. Is it called commuting?
Yeah, item transmutation. Yes,
I love that, because being able to make potions and ethers, elixirs, and things like that was really cool to have that, instead of just having to hopefully find random chests throughout the levels. So it was nice to have that, and then being able to also make these items for side quests was really cool. But I'm gushing so much, so I'm gonna kind of stop right there.
Listen, there's a lot to talk about in this game, so trust me. What Matt just went in on it only feels like a fraction, but I will say there are some things that I've compared. There's things I've compared this game to when you compare Remake to Rebirth. Obviously, Remake in 2020, a much more linear game. Sure, it had open sections. Sure, it had open zones, so to say. Wall Market, when you first get there, is open, and the Sector 7 slums are open. The Sector 5 slums are open. All these areas are open, but they're contained. Rebirth, on the other hand, you are seeing much more of the planet. You're going to a vast amount of locations. For example, in this one, whereas in Remake you're limited to Midgar, here you are going to the grasslands, Junon, the Junon region, Corel, basically Costa del Sol, Mount Corel, the Gold Saucer, all that. You're going to Gongaga, which is obviously has massive implications from Crisis Core, which Crisis Core is very important to understanding the story as well. We'll get into that. You will also obviously go to Cloud and Tifa's hometown of Nibelheim, as well as the Northern Woods, which is where the climax of the game takes place. So you see a lot more than just Midgar. Now, Midgar was an excellent setting for Remake, and I felt like Square did a great job of expanding upon the original and giving more detail where maybe there wasn't originally. I mean, I think if you go back and you play the original, after you leave the reactor that you blow up in the beginning, in the original, you almost go straight into bombing Reactor 5. You go straight into that. Like, there's no real in-between. There's no filler in between there. You get back to the Sector 7 slums, and within minutes, you are already getting ready to go blow up the next reactor. Whereas in Remake, there's probably about 3 or 4 hours of filler, depending on the difficulty you play on, and depending on how much side content you do. There's quite a bit of filler before you head to the next Mako reactor.
Oh, yeah.
In this game, I feel like, and Matt, we said this when we talked about it, and again, when we get into the story, it's going to be so much easier for us to discuss this. But
Yeah.
I feel like with Rebirth, it tells a bigger chunk of the story from the original game. It tells kind of the two halves of the story that we have, or the 2/3 of the story that we have so far, with the third one coming obviously 4 or 5 years from now. I feel like we see a lot more of the story of Final Fantasy VII in this game. Whereas in Remake, it felt like there was a lot of stuff that was expanded upon, a lot of stuff that was maybe added or given more detail to. That where, we saw a decent part, we saw a pretty significant chunk of the story. We saw all of what was on disc 1, basically. But in this one, it feels like the story carries a little bit more of the load here. Now, there are a lot of things that are added. This game, if you love mini games in a video game, this is the game for you. You will thrive in this game, because from everything at the Golden Saucer, or at the Gold Saucer, to the Fort Condor quest you can go on in the Junon region, to the game that took over my life the moment I played it for the first time in Queen's Blood, there are so many mini games here that it feels like I think when I left off before we recorded here, because obviously I've been trying to play Rise of the Ronin and Dragon's Dogma 2 the last couple of days. When I left off before we recorded tonight, I was at about 55 hours in the game. I was seeing new things 45 plus hours into the game that I had no idea existed. To give you a little bit of an idea, and Matt, I'll let you go through what all you've done at this point. At this point of recording, I've completed the story. I've found all the proto-relics and fought Gilgamesh. I've completed all of the world intel in 2 separate regions. And the only thing I hate that I didn't get a chance to do before recording is I wanted to go back and experience all of the other dates at the Gold Saucer. That, whenever I get back into this game and we have downtime, that will be one of the first things I go back to do, is experiencing all of the potential dates you can have at the Gold Saucer with every character. I had my personal date with Aerith. I know Matt probably had his with Tifa, which I get it. Her and Cloud is canon. I understand. But I don't know if it's canon, but it's a ship that makes sense because Aerith belongs with Zack Fair, which, don't worry, we're going to talk about him too, so don't worry. There's a lot. Trust me, y'all, this review is going to cover a lot of different things. Like, if we sound frantic, it's going to cover a lot of different things, so just hang with us.
Right.
But I'm excited to see what all that holds. Matt, what have you completed fully up to this point of recording?
Well, what I have completed so far is because in the beginning of me playing this game, I was kind of wanting to run through and make sure that I did everything in each region as I was in it before I ended up continuing the story itself. So I was doing the first couple of Proto Relic quests. With Fort Condor is probably one of the most interesting ones. Very frustrating if you don't know what you're doing. It's basically kind of like rock, paper, scissors. You have different classes of these characters that you will play as, and you basically it's like tower defense in a way. Your main objective is you need to get your forces over onto the enemy side and basically deplete the health of, I guess I want to call it their king, kind of like in chess or something or checkers. Chess, not right, in chess. So that was a lot of fun. I was doing a lot of the side quests for each region. They're the little, when you go to like the mission boards and you do quests for NPCs. And I did a lot of the Chadley's towers to the battle where you have to fight enemies that have a specific task that you have to perform in order to complete it. I thought those were fun. Some were a little frustrating. There was one I remember where it's basically you cannot get swallowed by the sandworm, and it was almost impossible to dodge it, but I got it eventually, and it just felt really good to do it. As well as finding life crystals in the area, because when you get those, you get more intel on the region itself. And once you get them all, you actually unlock I guess I want to call it like a secret mini boss in a way. So those are really fun, and they were very challenging as well. There's this one I remember I was having such a frustrating time with. It's basically like this Cthulhu-like monster, and I was just, hammering his health away. And he has this move that instantly kills you, which was a big bummer. And you can't revive from that, so that really sucked. But it was challenging in a good way. It was fun. I think the most recent one that I was doing was the Proto Relic in the desert with the Cactuars. I was to continue the story because at some point it just kind of stops. So I had to continue the story in order for the other ones to access. And again, Queen's Blood was fantastic. This is something I think like anyone could easily get into, especially as a card game fan. Like, it really works, and it is so much fun to collect the cards. And I actually ended up finding out that you got cards of the main cast, like Cloud in them. I was so like, whoa, I was not expecting that. So that was really cool to see that. And lots of mini games. I had this whole entire thing where I wanted to complete the highest tier for the mini games, because it turns out that actually goes for something later on in the game with a certain character's quest where you collect these items in order to like fill up his kind of museum like hotel. We can get a little bit more into that later. And then one of my favorite things in this game is the chocobos. I absolutely love the chocobos. It makes traveling across the levels so much fun. Especially like when you see like a little miniature chocobo and it leads you to a chocobo rest stop, and it's just like the cutest little things. I did think it was weird that in order to use a chocobo rest stop, that you have to have a pillow. I was just like, Cloud, just sit on the bench, man. I don't want to make a pillow for you just so I can, rest up here. But
yeah,
man,
I did think that was weird.
We're barely scratching the surface here about all there is to do in this game, and we haven't even gotten to the story yet. So this game is absolutely worth the $7 price tag, and even then some. Like, I was hoping that I was going to get the limited edition or whatever it was, but my pre-order ended up getting canceled, so I ended up getting this game digitally. And that's fine. I'm just glad that I got to play it.
Yeah, I will say this to that effect. I got this game digitally as well. Kyle and I obviously license share, and we split it. I loved this game so much that I will probably go and buy a physical copy, and I will probably never open it.
Yeah.
And I remember that I'm going to pull a Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. I want y'all to remember that I said that, because that's going to become relevant later in this episode. I will tie that story in a little bit more accurately there. But there's so much to do in this game. You get so much bang for your buck. And I mean, I didn't even mention in all things that I did. I also finished all of the Queen's Blood matches before recording. And the final one is quite a headache. It's very difficult, and you have to play a certain way in order to beat the Shadow Queen champion. But after completing all of the Queen's Blood matches, I can safely say that is one of my favorite mini games that has ever been added to a game. So, Square, you did a great job with Queen's Blood. I hope that an actual app or game comes from that and becomes a thing in real life. I would absolutely play it. It was a lot of fun. Basically, the stretch of the game is there's 3 lanes. There's 3 lanes with, I believe, 9 total tiles in each lane. Or no, 4 tiles in each lane. Yes. And you start on one side, your opponent starts on the other, and you're doing your best to raise the power level of each lane to where your power level is higher than the other players. And there's so many more intricate things to it. It's one of those that I wish I could explain it better. If you don't feel like I've explained it well, go look it up on YouTube. It is awesome. It was addicting. And when I first heard about it in reviews, I said, probably not going to play a lot of that. And the first time I played it, I said, oh my God, I'm hooked. I am so hooked. So as far as the actual main gameplay itself, what Matt said, what you said was spot on in that Final Fantasy VII Remake was already about as peak action RPG combat as action RPG combat gets. It was the peak of it all. And I feel like somehow Rebirth has managed to top that. The thing that I love the most about this game, and it's what we all figured would happen, and I hope that it happens going into Part 3. Again, more on that later. The expanded character roster. You now no longer just have Cloud, Tifa, Aerith, and Barrett. You now also have Yuffie, who joins at some point about the 40% mark of the story. Yeah. You have Red 13, who's with you from the beginning. And you also add Kate Sith at some point from the Gold Saucer, who joins the party. So you have a more varied roster of characters to select from. It gives you a bunch of different abilities that you have to master in order to get the platinum, and it's been a lot of fun going for those. They're actually really, really simple and really straightforward to master. You just have to use the abilities over and over, and you'll get there. But the combat is so varied that I don't feel like any 2 characters play the same. You know, Cloud is obviously that soldier build. He's that former member of Soldier, the Shinra paramilitary group, and he plays exactly how you remember him from Remake. Tifa is that brawler that I honestly had some of the most fun playing as her because of the way she's able to quickly get around the battlefield, build up her ATB gauge, and perform special attacks. Aerith is that healer. Barrett is more of that ranged attack. But really, I feel like the combat shines specifically with 2 of the new additions in Yuffie and Red 13. Red 13 has attacks that grant him health bonuses, that he can get some of his health back. Yuffie is one of those great mixes of range attack and up close because she can throw her weapons and can control them while they're in midair, and she can also teleport directly to them to chain combos together. So it's really, really cool. All of the characters, again, they all feel very different from one another. Kate Sith wasn't my favorite to play as, but I still thought that, you know, as a whole, they did a really good job in building his character out and building his moveset out. It's going to be probably the last character that I master all the abilities for, but Kate Sith is still pretty fun to play as. He just wasn't my favorite. And I feel like, especially with the combat simulator that Chadley has put together, each of these characters get their chances to shine at different points, both in the combat sim and in the main game in combat. And I like that. It would be very, very easy in a game like this with so many playable characters. It'd be very easy for maybe 1 or 2 of them to kind of get left in the dust and you don't use them that much, but you don't really have that feeling at any point. You don't feel like, oh, this character's not really getting used. They're not really useful for anything. No, like there are characters that are useful for any for just about any situation you can come across. And the best part of it all, Matt, and I loved this, and I know that you did as well, even the characters you don't have in your party, they will assist in combat, and they also do level up at the same time you do. So they're getting XP the entire time. They're improving the entire time. The only difference is they can't master their skills. They only can do that when you are using them. So the combat is every bit as damn fantastic, if not better, than Remakes was. And that's crazy because I just got done playing Remake before Rebirth came out. And I remember texting you and saying, man, this game, even though it's only 4 years old, it feels like it's aged and somehow it's gotten even better. And Rebirth is kind of the culmination of all of that, where it feels like on every level, it has improved. So there's a lot of great things in the gameplay. Again, we've gushed this entire episode so far about, there's so much bang for your buck here. I will say something controversial. I have never minded that games went up to $70. There are some games I don't believe are worth $70, and that's for another day. If you told me that the standard edition of this game was $90, I would pay it. I would absolutely pay it because I feel like I would still be getting my money's worth. So, that's the gameplay. That's the gist of all the activities in the area. I think it's now time, Matt, for us to delve into the story. And for us to delve into the story, we have to talk about spoilers. So, this is the initial spoiler warning I'm going to get. We are going to break down this story in detail. We're going to do our best to touch on everything that's important from beginning to end. We will give a separate spoiler warning when we get to the ending, because there are a lot of people that are probably wondering about the ending. There are a lot of people that have probably played the game that are wondering what our interpretation of the ending is, and specifically what we thought of that scene. So we will get to that, but we will give you a separate, more advanced spoiler warning when we get there before we do that. So, Matt, the game starts, and I remember telling Kyle this, and he's not on the episode. He's played the game, but he didn't want to be on it, not having finished the story. But I remember telling y'all that what I love the most about where the story started is it picks up right at the end of Final Fantasy VII Remake. Midgar is pretty much in shambles because of the tornado from the Whisper of Fates. If you remember the ending, when you defeated the Harbinger of Fate as Cloud, you essentially fulfilled what Sephiroth wanted you to do. And that was, I guess we should also probably give you a spoiler warning for Final Fantasy VII Remake, but I mean, that game's been out for 4 years. So when you defeat the Harbinger of Fate, you essentially create a branching timeline. Now, the only way to really keep track of these timelines, and I'm going to be honest with y'all, it's still kind of confusing, but I'm going to do my best here, is the different versions of the Shinra mascot, Stamp. In the main timeline, Stamp is a beagle wearing a military helmet. In the timeline that is created as a part of the remake ending, Stamp is now a puppy with a baseball cap on now. I don't think he's a border collie. I don't think that's the breed of dog he is. But he's a furry puppy with a baseball hat on. And Remake makes it very, very clear, hey, this is your sign for understanding it's a new timeline. The beginning of the game opens with Midgar in shambles and Zack Fair, who is very much alive because of the ending of Remake. He has made it back to Midgar, where we find, Matt, that not only is Midgar in shambles, but every member of Avalanche outside of Aerith and Biggs are dead. They are all dead. They are being taken away by Shinra. Barret and Tifa die in the crashing of the plate. Red 13 dies crashing the helicopter that's carrying Aerith. Cloud is in a coma due to Mako poisoning from the end of Crisis Core, which again, we said Crisis Core kind of important to understanding this game. Here's why. And we're kind of not really told much about Zack, Matt. And I know that this is where a lot of the questions about Zack Fair and his role in all this start. This opening does a lot to get you hooked early.
Yeah, so before Rebirth came out, they actually released a demo, and it basically had you playing as Cloud during the events in Nibelheim when he and Sephiroth were sent by Shinra to, do reconnaissance around the reactor. So I thought, to myself, so why is Cloud experiencing, the events that Zack went through in Crisis Core? And then, I was reminded of myself that after what happened to Zack, Cloud, with his trauma, the Mako poisoning, everything just affecting him, he ended up, taking on Zack's memories. So the way he remembers it as he is telling the story to the others is that, he was the one who went to the reactor with Sephiroth. He's the one that experienced Sephiroth figuring out the truth about his birth, and Sephiroth taking it out on the world and starting that off with burning Nibelheim down to the ground. And I thought that was really interesting, especially as you are further going through the game. Tifa herself is just kind of like, Zack, or, Cloud, I don't remember you being there. And then through the same time, Cloud remembers Tifa being killed by Sephiroth. And he's just thinking that Tifa is not the real Tifa, even though, she proves to him that, that she was rescued and that she was, they saved her life. This doctor saved her life, and she has a scar to prove it. And then this game is really such a good development for Cloud, because in the base game and remake, Cloud he's just a merc for hire working with Avalanche. There's just not really much of story out, a motive for him. But this game gives him that motive after the events that happened in remake. And, he's currently going through the whole process with the degradation. He's being affected by Sephiroth himself, and he keeps seeing these images of Sephiroth and hearing his voice, and basically Sephiroth is controlling him. And throughout the game, Cloud is just constantly he's I don't know how to say this. He's basically just like under his control, and he just comes off as this isn't Cloud. This is someone, this is Cloud possessed. Like he just straight up murders Shinra soldiers, and their blood splatters on his face, and he just seems completely unfazed by it. And there's just like this deep fight going on in Cloud's mind with Sephiroth the whole entire time. And I think that allows a lot of character progress, development in this game. And that's one thing I love about this game is, yes, this is solely revolving around Cloud and his whole thing with Sephiroth, but everybody, each party member kind of gets like their own section of the game where it explains them. Like, we find out about Barrett's past, about what happened with him in his village, and Shinra putting a reactor there, and then that reactor exploding, and Shinra just basically killing anyone involved in that village, as there were no witnesses to it. And then with Red 13, we go to Cosmo Canyon, and we go to his village and see where he's from. And there's a lot that they put in here that just really makes me appreciate, like, yes, these are long chapters, but as you are going through it, it is so worth it just to get to the end and seeing these characters and building them up and seeing their stories, unfold, and everything all coming together to conclude to the ending. Like, Square Enix did such a great job with this. It's something that, we weren't really able to get in the original because, things were so limited with hardware being not nearly as powerful, and them not really being able to create that narrative that current generation consoles are able to give us. I mean, Yuffie doesn't get too much, but that's also because Yuffie got her own side story with Remake, and that's actually something I still have not played. But now that I played Rebirth, and I kind of get glimpses of that, I do want to go back and see Yuffie's story. And I also love the fact that the Turks get such a good role here. I mean, yes, they're just typical enemies that you fight, but it's like, even though they're kind of the bad guys because they do work for Shinra, they are some of the coolest characters in Final Fantasy VII. I like each and every one of them, from Rude, even the new one, Elena. Reno's not really in this one, but we'll get to that. And then and Song, he was the one from that took Aerith in, and when Shinra had her, he has such a compassion for her, and I really think that Song truly cares about Aerith. Man, there's just so much to this game. It's like, we're definitely not going to be able to cover most of it, but I just like the fact that the main goal here is to find Sephiroth, and that's how that's how the party, our characters, get from place to place, as they're following the robes. And these are basically these mysterious men and these black robes, who we later find out are actually members of Soldier that are affected through the degradation process that comes with becoming a soldier. So it's really fantastic, and it's really well done.
Yeah, I will compare this story to a couple different films, or to a couple groups of films, using Remake along the way as well. So the first comparison I'm going to make, and this is a comparison you've not heard me make yet, Matt. If Remake was Guardians of the Galaxy, I think this is Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. One, I believe it's better in every way, and that's a fact, not an opinion. But two, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 is more of a character-driven story. It's more of a character development, character growth story where you learn a little bit about each of the Guardians of the Galaxy. It's very much the case here as well. You learn a lot about what makes Cloud and Tifa tick, and a lot about their home life in Nibelheim before it's burned down by Cloud, or not by Cloud, by Sephiroth. My bad, Jesus. That's the glitching that Cloud experiences. That's me experiencing a timeline where Cloud was the villain. But you learn a little bit more about him. You learn a lot about Aerith and her bringing up as well, and about her mother Ifalna. You learn a lot about her. In fact, you also see her last moments when she gives Aerith the white materia when Aerith was a child. So, and again, more on that later. More specifically, the white materia later. You learn a lot about Red 13's upbringing in Cosmo Canyon, and one of my favorite sections, you learn about why Barrett is not excited to return to his home on North Corel because of a deal that he made with Shinra long ago that cost him his village, at the time, his best friend, and his arm. So, there's a lot to unpack from a character standpoint here. There's a lot to talk about in terms of growth. And Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, again, does a great job of letting each of these characters breathe a little bit, letting each of these characters get their moment in the spotlight. Obviously, like you said, Matt, Yuffie didn't exactly have that spotlight, but her story was told in intermission where, she goes on that mission with her friend Sonon, and he ultimately has to sacrifice himself for her to live and for her to escape. Yeah. So, there's a lot of stuff that is talked about there. Cait Sith, again, I don't think has a ton of backstory, but Cait Sith is also not introduced to the party until closer to like chapter 9. So one of my favorite moments in this game is specifically in chapter 8, the end of chapter 8, when I said it at first looks like Barrett's deal with Shinra costs him his best friend, Dyne. You end up finding out that he is still alive. Yeah. And he has kind of lost his mind a little bit. And he believes that his wife is dead, and he believes that his daughter is dead as well. And that is where we have one of the first big reveals that I remember from this game. Marlene is not Barrett's actual daughter. She is Dyne's daughter, who Barrett has taken care of because of his guilt over Dyne's death at the time. Dyne has lost his mind. He has attached a gun to his arm the same way Barrett has, and he's become almost this rogue mercenary of himself. But more or less, he's just looking for revenge. He's looking for blood against Shinra. He tries to get that at the Gold Saucer in Chapter 8. Barrett is framed. You end up finding Dyne in the desert out in the Corel Desert, and it's one of my favorite boss fights in the game, because there's so much emotion in it. You can tell Barrett does not want to kill his friend. You can tell he doesn't want to have a part in this, but he also knows he's the only one that can do it. He tells the others to stay back and let him deal with it. And ultimately, when Dyne is killed by Shinra, it's one of those moments where Barrett realizes, oh, wow, now I've actually lost my friend. And again, it all doubles back to the deal he made with Shinra. When they originally came to North Corel to build a reactor, the reactor went up in flames. There was an accident, and instead of helping the town, Shinra decided to try to cover up everything and basically annihilated the town instead. Similar to what Sephiroth did to Nibelheim. When he found what he found at the Nibelheim reactor, he essentially just kind of wrecks everything in Nibelheim. That's one of my favorite parts in the game, is he has this moment where, his friend is back, but he's clearly lost his mind. He's killing innocent people. He's going about everything the wrong way, kind of how Barrett approached everything in Remake, a little bit more gung-ho, a little bit more aggressive, and a little bit more less thinking, more shooting. And it's kind of an eye-opening moment for Barrett. So that's one of those it's one of those moments where, again, I just loved it because it's a character we knew for such a short amount of time, but it worked. And I think one of the best parts of it is Barrett showing Dyne in his dying moment, showing him that picture of Marlene, and saying that, because Dyne was always under the assumption that his wife and Marlene were both dead. And he never knew that Marlene was alive the entire time in Midgar. So when Barrett shows him a photo of her a little bit more grown, it's just this moment he realizes where, hey, my baby girl is still out there. She's alive, and she's got a better life than she had. So it's a really, really impactful moment. Let's talk a little bit about the Gold Saucer, Matt, because that for me was one of my favorite chapters in the game, specifically the Chapter 8 version, because we got to spend more time there. Talk about why you loved your time at the Gold Saucer.
Honestly, just the design of the golden saucer was just so awesome, especially once you arrive and we get that kind of musical moment. You know, with Andrea from Final Fantasy VII Remake, if you remember him from the Bumblebee
Yeah.
in or whatever. This whole little dance segment, and then Aerith and Tifa and Yuffie are all dancing. It was just that is just one of the things that I love about Japanese games is they just do the craziest like things, and it's so mesmerizing to watch it. And then, once we get through all that, we end up meeting Dio, and he is basically the owner of the Golden Saucer. And he's an interesting character. He's just all about his muscles, and it's just kind of like, okay, man, we get it. And then you're introduced to 3D Brawler, which it was actually, I believe it was in the original. It was a lot of fun. I want to go back and actually complete all of them. It's a little challenging, especially as you get to the later fights, but it's still fun. And then I think one of the coolest things is when you go to the haunted hotel in basically the hotel where you stay at. That was really cool. Especially like when you get your room, because you end up not being able to get a room because all the reservations are booked. But Kate Sith ends up using his whatever in order to he removed Palmer, and the other and a few of the other Turks were staying at the hotel, but Kate Sith ends up removing his booking and then replacing it with Cloud and the others. And then honestly, like, when you go into the room, it is so cool. You see like some of these enemies that you recognize from the game. What's the one that I'm thinking of? The little green guy with the knife.
Oh, the Tonberry, yeah.
Yeah, the Tomberry. It's kind of cool because he's basically like a little cleaner, and he like shoots out this mist, and it's just so atmospheric, and it just works so well. And then you got the area where you go to, so like where you do a spaceship battle, which was a lot of fun. You have the bike cycle, like it's kind of like in the first game where you go up against Roche. That was a lot of fun. Like there's just such a variety of things to do at the Golden Saucer, and it's just like I could probably just stay here for a really long time just playing these mini games because they are just so much fun. Um, and then I think the other one that I haven't really touched on was the Musclehead tournament. I want to go back and do that, especially because I know there's a trophy lot behind that. I'm not gonna lie. So when I was playing this game, I did set it to the medium setting, and I went straight, like when I went to the Muzzlehead, like I did the very first one, I got my ass handed to me. I was like, okay, am I under leveled? What? Why am I just being like knocked out? Because I'm already like level 20 something at this point. So I mean, I'm gonna go back eventually.
Oh,
But
you were absolutely under leveled. Jesus Christ. Yeah, you were if you were in the level 20s at chapter 8, yeah, we start on like level 15.
I might be wrong. I was probably in the 30s. I can't.
Yeah, I
I
hope
can't
you
quite
were.
remember.
That's 100% why you were dying.
But yeah, there's a lot to do here. I also like how you have like the little Moogle guy who can teleport you to go to the different attractions. And then that gets that point where you go to the Ferris wheel. And in my game I was going with Tifa, but then it's interrupted because this is what the storyline with Dying starts when he shoots the senior soldiers, and then Barrett gets what's that word?
Framed.
Framed. Gosh, yes, thank you. Yeah, this I love that whole area. I can't stop thinking about it. I remember just when you go there for the first time and you see like the summons like Shiva and Ifrit, and they're basically just like these holograms. It was just so cool. It was just like I'll go back and watch that cutscene, especially when they're watching it on a really good TV. It's just mind blowing.
For me, why I loved the Gold Saucer is the same reason why I loved Chapter 8 in Remake.
Yeah.
I think that in both of these games, the slower moments have been, in my opinion, some of the best moments of the story. And they've been the moments that have best have best given us kind of an insight into how these characters think and how they act. And I like that. I like seeing I like seeing them interact like that. I like, in Chapter 8 of Remake, it was you exploring the Sector 5 slums with Aerith. It was the first real time you got to spend any time with her, and it was great. And in this, it's crazy because depending on how you've made choices throughout the game and depending on how you've interacted with certain characters, you can go on a date with quite literally anybody. I ended up with Aerith because I guess I just made more Aerith-centric choices. I didn't really try to, but I was pretty pleased with that because Aerith has become one of my favorite characters in the game. So I think that these slower sections where it's less about combat and it's more about taking this world in, for me, that is where these two games have excelled so far. I think the combat's amazing, and the combat is some of the best in an action RPG. It's some of the best gaming space ever. It really is. But in these slower moments, I feel like that's where these games have been allowed to thrive specifically. And for me personally, I think that might be why I didn't love Final Fantasy XVI as much. I think that game is all gas, no brakes. There's no real slow moments, and it's a very lengthy game of that. It's, if Remake or Rebirth were like that, the difference is those games, the stories are probably about 30 to 35 hours long, maybe 40, depending on the difficulty you play on. Final Fantasy 16 is a 60 to 70 hour epic that never slows down, that never stops. And the way I've described it, it never stops to smell the roses. It never stops to kind of let things breathe and to let you take in everything you've seen. And I like that these two games have allowed us to do that. So the Gold Saucer absolutely is a highlight for me. I think that really Chapter 8 is when this game really starts to hit its upward trajectory. The first 7 chapters are great. Chapter 8 to Chapter 14 are phenomenal and some of the best stuff in gaming that I've played recently. With all of that being said, the main story at this point, as you get to the Gold Saucer, is you are trying your damnedest to stop Sephiroth from getting the black materia, which, for anyone that has played the original, or anyone that hasn't played the original, I should say, the black materia is what Sephiroth uses in the original to essentially summon Meteor and destroy the planet so that he can absorb the life stream to become a god, essentially. Now, it goes without saying that with the creation of multiple timelines that we are going to dive into soon, I promise. I know this episode is really, really long, but bear with me. Again, at this point in the episode, get your popcorn ready, get all the snacks ready, because we're about to have to explain a lot of shit that's probably not going to make a lot of sense. So, your goal this whole time has been to stop Sephiroth from gaining the black materia, which is at the Temple of the Ancients. You find out about the Temple of the Ancients after you go to Nibelheim. You meet up with old Vincent Valentine, who joins the party. Along the way, you also meet up with Sid Highwind, who becomes one of your main fast travel options throughout the rest of the game. And I imagine both of them will be playable to some extent in the third game as well. They're not playable.
Vincent better be playable. I was so excited when I saw him.
Vincent absolutely should be playable. In fact, I loved it because I said that I remember in Crisis Core when Zack goes to the basement of the Shinra Manor in Nibelheim and he sees the coffin and he opens it, but it doesn't show who's in it, and he goes, probably shouldn't wake him up right now. And then you find that same coffin in Rebirth, and Vincent jumps out of it, and you find out that he's like some security, some ex-Turk security that is guarding all of the Genova chambers down there. So he obviously ends up joining you because he realizes that Sephiroth, in order to stop Sephiroth, you're going to need his help, and he has his own debt to settle, or his own kind of game to settle with Sephiroth, so to say. So you find out that the Temple of the Ancients is where the black materia is housed. And after getting the key from Dio, or trying to get the key from Dio, and being betrayed by Cait Sith, which I never trusted him when he joined the party. Never trusted Cait Sith, not for a second. And while he does his best to explain his decision-making at the end by saying that, nobody that's ever gone into the Temple of the Ancients has ever come out alive. He wanted that to happen to the Turks. He didn't want that to happen to Cloud, Aerith, Tifa, and the party. He didn't want that to happen to them. He did it to try to protect them. The problem is he never really explained it in the moment, and he wasn't able to explain it until much, much later. Well, I say much later. He wasn't able to explain it until later in the game. At this point, it's Chapter 12. You're heading north to the Northern Wood to go to the Temple of the Ancients. And after a lot of puzzle solving, because Chapter 13 is one of the longest chapters in a game ever, you get access to the Black Materia, and Cloud loses his mind and gives it to Sephiroth.
Yep.
Go ahead.
I was just like, this is like one of those moments where, I'm kind of just cracking some jokes. I mean, I'm just like, oh look, Cloud is like Sephiroth's little bitch. Like I was just like, bro.
I think that
Sephiroth's number one fanboy here.
Well, and I think that the important thing for all of us to remember in this timeline is, because if you remember at the Gongaga reactor that Cisne, which I was really glad to see her, she ends up sending you off to I guess go find the weapon that's there, because we haven't even talked about the weapons that are like the living weapons of the world that have these gigantic materias inside them. We haven't even, and I think that, and I know that we will see 100% more of them in Part 3. They will be a key part of Part 3.
Yeah, we will.
You have an incident as Cloud at the reactor there where you kill all these soldiers, and then you almost kill Tifa because Sephiroth has been essentially pulling your strings as a puppet, and you end up like doubting that she's the real one, and you end up almost killing her. Yeah. So it's one of those things where like Cloud is not okay in the head, and the game goes a long way to explain the degradation, and ultimately anyone that has been given Mako or has had Mako injected into them, their bodies are slowly degrading. We saw this in Crisis Core with Angeal and with Genesis, that as they degraded, their minds were one of the first things to go. They became monsters. Sephiroth, being essentially the perfect creation from Genova's cells, he lost his mind when he found out that he was a creation, and that's what ultimately led to his villain turn. Sephiroth was a war hero, which Crisis Core does a great job of showing his fall from grace, essentially as, I don't want to say Lucifer, falling from the heavens and becoming Satan, but that's essentially what Sephiroth's story is. He was a war hero, and he becomes evil once finding out that he was just a lab creation, and he was created from Genova's cells, one of the oldest ancients that ever existed. I believe the first ancient, actually, that ever existed. So, and again, if I'm misexplaining this lore, forgive me, everybody. I'm doing my best to interpret it. So, forgive me. But Cloud is not okay, obviously, mentally, and we notice this in Remake. In Remake, he is constantly having these flashes where it seems like he is almost experiencing multiple realities, or where he is experiencing events that are happening in other timelines. Yeah. For example, he sees a vision of Aerith's death in Remake. He sees her materia falling at the altar of in the Forgotten Capital. He sees her materia falling, something that has been synonymous with the 1997 scene where Aerith is killed by Sephiroth. Yes. So he's seeing all of these events. He's experiencing multiple realities almost. He is not okay. He's experiencing this degradation, and while everybody is doing their best to kind of keep him sane, Sephiroth is also doing an equal, if not better, job of mind controlling him, and he ends up giving him the Black Materia at the end of Chapter 13. Now, this is where shit gets wild. So, as I promised you earlier, this is your spoiler warning for the ending of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Matt and I are about to delve as deep as we fucking can to understand this ending and the complete mindfuck that we are put through in Chapter 14. There's a lot to unpack here. There's a lot to go over. It is best experienced without knowing what's going to happen going in. So if you don't care about spoilers or you've already played the game, welcome. Just understand, if you haven't played the game and you just don't care about spoilers, this stuff will not hit the same way if you hear it from us first. So, with all that being said, Matt, let's talk about this ending. So, at the beginning of Chapter 14, you are awoken back in Midgar as Cloud. Yeah. And Aerith is awake. And it's worth pointing out, you know what, actually, I'll save that little tidbit for later. I don't need to go into that tidbit now, actually. Aerith basically tells you, Cloud's like, where are we? What's going on? Aerith says, well, if it helps, think of it as a dream. And you go on a date. Before you walk outside of out of Elmira's house, however, Aerith tells you, promise me you won't look up. And you're probably wondering what that means. Well, Cloud walks outside, and of course, being the guy that he is, looks up at the sky, and lo and behold, there is a gigantic rift. And what that has become synonymous with is in the timelines and universes where the planet is doomed and is in its final days, that rift appears in the sky. So that timeline that they are existing in is essentially dying. It's the people there have accepted its fate. There's no saving it. Sephiroth, at one point, we hear his voice talking to Aerith, and he says, "Oh, this is where you've been hiding. You thought you could avoid me here in another reality." So what I think we are led to believe is that this Aerith is the one that is in Zack's timeline. Her soul is not in that body. Her soul is hiding in this kind of dream world. She's essentially dream walking, like Wanda Maximoff from Multiverse of Madness. She's essentially walking different realities. And a scene we haven't really discussed yet because it wasn't relevant until now, that becomes relevant is when you're at Costa del Sol, there's a scene between Aerith and Red 13. And in it, Aerith has her materia that her mother gave her, but it's no longer white. In fact, it looks like nothing more than just a clear glass bulb. And the understanding is every time Aerith made contact with the Whispers of Fate in Remake, her memories were stolen from that materia until there was nothing left for them to take.
Yeah.
So you go on this date with Aerith, and you do a lot of similar things that you did as Zack with Aerith in Crisis Core. For example, picking out her little hair accessory. You do that in Crisis Core as Zack. You're essentially playing through that same thing together, but as Cloud now. You end up going back to the church, and this is where the mindfuck really begins, Matt, because all of this sounds crazy. I can't believe we're actually talking about this. I want everybody to understand context. I finished this game, as of recording, I finished this game 2.5 weeks ago. I finished the story 2.5 weeks ago. I have been waiting for one of these two fuckers to finish the story so that I can talk about it. And it's almost surreal that I'm finally getting to talk about it. So you go to the church, and you and Aerith have a really, really good moment. She's like, I finally understand where you and I stand. Yeah. And it's this really touching moment. And then she gives Cloud her white materia, and this rift opens up behind him, and she pushes him into it and says, "Goodbye. It's been a lot of fun. Remember, no matter what happens, don't blame yourself." And the last thing we see before we fade back out is we see the doors to the church opening and Sephiroth walking in.
Yep.
So I think, Matt, this is their way of hinting at something. I don't want to get into that just yet. But this whole section for me, again, it's where things kind of start to become convoluted. Now, I don't think the convoluted nature of it ruined the story. I love the convoluted nature because it forced me to think a lot about the story. It forced me to think a lot and interpret a lot. I liked that. First of all, do you think I interpreted it correctly? Is there anything you disagreed with? Or just what were you thinking when all of this was happening?
So I actually think you're right on the money. Honestly, I like the way that you spoke about how, Aerith's soul is not in the body that is currently residing in her mom's house with Zack and Cloud, but it's like what you said, she's essentially dreamwalking. That does make a lot of sense. And it also makes sense when you think about the fact that Cloud has to have the white materia. It is just one of those essential parts of the plot that goes along with what's to come. And the fact that, and it's like Aerith also knew that she, fate is not going to be able to go the way it's supposed to if that white materia is not with Cloud during a very specific moment. And when you watch Sephiroth walk into the church, it is absolutely hinting at, and it just seems like no matter how many life, timelines there are, it is always going to end the same. And we do see that a little bit further on. Like, we know what's coming, and as confusing as it is, it also makes a lot of sense. Because another thing that I have kind of thought to myself was, this version of Sephiroth that we are seeing is not only from the original Final Fantasy, but this is also the same Sephiroth from Advent Children. He knows what is, the events to come, and he's doing everything in his possibility, in his power to stop it. And then that's also when he has that little exposition with Cloud about timelines and how everything is coming together, and that's why it's called the homecoming, a reunion, or timelines and everything coming together. Because Sephiroth does not just want to rule one timeline; he wants to rule all of them. And this whole remake, sequel, whatever you want to call it, has really made Sephiroth into a much more complicated character. This genocidal, murdering psychopath is now just I don't know what to call him, but honestly, Sephiroth is probably one of my all-time favorite villains in a video game, and this game right here really drives it home as to why he is this complex character who we will never be able to make any sense of, other than that he is just pure evil.
Yep. He is basically become what Michael Myers is to Halloween. He is the essence of evil. That's despite the evil dies tonight bullshit. The comparison remains the same. So to explain this next part, because I think that is one of the biggest twists to remake and rebirth is this Sephiroth is not just the same one, like you said, from the original. This Sephiroth knows how the story goes. He knows how events are supposed to play out. This is a master of the multiverse, Sephiroth, because he doesn't want to just be a god over one universe. He wants to be a god over infinity, over the entirety of the multiverse. So his plan is, when all of these timelines converge and you have the confluence of worlds, which, just so everyone understands, I looked this up. I did research before this episode. A confluence is basically when two rivers meet, specifically rivers that are parallel to each other. So rivers that are side by side, that are going in pretty much the same directions, when they meet, that's what a confluence is. So the confluence of worlds is when all of these timelines that are going in the same direction, going down the same path of ultimately him summoning Meteor, and whether or not Aerith and Cloud can stop him, they're all going towards the same place. They will all converge at the same point. And it will all be about, okay, do they stop him or do they not? He wants to summon Meteor. He doesn't want to just obliterate the main timeline. He wants to obliterate every timeline and absorb all of that life stream and become an all-powerful being over the entirety of the multiverse. And the multiverse is not specifically the term that's used here, but basically when a world dies, it's a lot like when someone dies on the planet. Their soul returns to the life stream. There is a multiversal life stream that when a planet dies, its essence returns to that life stream. Sephiroth plans to destroy every world and then absorb that life stream to become an all-powerful god over basically space and time as we know it in this story. Yeah. So that is a very key difference from the original to now. It's very much why Remake and Rebirth are almost more sequels to the original than they are straight up remakes. And I think that's crazy to think about how Square has told this story and has deepened it this much. Because sure, it's convoluted, and sure, there's a lot of mind-bending and there's a lot of things you have to accept. But now that I'm saying a lot of it out loud, to be honest, it makes a lot of sense. Now, what we're about to talk about probably doesn't make as much sense, and we're going to try to explain it as best we can. So, Matt, I've been dreading it for however long this episode is, because I just want to say this, and I wanted to tie back to what I said earlier about wanting to buy a sealed physical copy of this game. Brianna White, the voice actress for Aerith Gainsborough in this game, bravo. You 100% deserve a best performance nod for your performance as Aerith in this game. 1,000,000%. She was the star of this game, in my opinion. And she has hit my Mount Rushmore of VAs to the point of now I have scoured Streamily looking to see if there is a signing that she is doing, so that way I can, obviously buy some kind of a print to go up on the Streamily wall. For those that don't know, I've got a big old wall with a bunch of signings. There's Troy Baker, Jennifer Hale, Scott Arthur, Jason Kelly. There's Johnny Cruz. There's a lot of Dante Bosco. There's a lot of voice actors that I've got, signed memorabilia for up in my room here in my apartment. And I absolutely would love to add one for Brianna White, because she was just magnificent in this game. Magnificent. And I loved everything about her performance. Which makes that scene that we're about to discuss, rather painful. Because the number one question that all of us had going into this game was, is Aerith still going to die? And the answer is yes. Because while Remake said that events can be changed, Rebirth very much goes along the path of some events can be changed, but in order for the story to play out the way it needs to for everyone to live, some events have to remain the same. So you get to the Forgotten Capital, where it was revealed a few months ago that this is where the game would end. And I'm going to compare this, I'm going to compare one more thing, or I'm going to compare one set of movies to this as well. If Remake is Star Wars A New Hope, Rebirth is very much Empire Strikes Back. Because the heroes do not end this game feeling like the winners. Rebirth very much sets out to say that while some events can change, some events have to play out the same way. Aerith's death ultimately is one of them. It's painful and it sucks.
Yeah.
Because you get to the Capitol, you get to the altar where she's praying, and the Whispers start to interfere with Cloud. They're trying to keep him from interfering, and it looks like the game is almost going to make you as Cloud strike her down. Mm-hmm. Which I was spamming R2 and L2 so fast to make sure that didn't happen. And you end up holding back, and the moment it panned to Aerith and you saw her kind of open her eyes and look up, I said, "Oh no, this is it." I was like, this is it. And then the camera pans up after you see a few black feathers, and here comes old Sephiroth dropping down. And right as he's about to impale her, Cloud swings his sword, stops the Masamune, knocks it away, and looks like you've saved Aerith, only for that glitch to happen where that Cloud kind of has that moment of phasing in and out of reality, where the sword all of a sudden has blood on it, there's blood on the ground, and Aerith is falling over because you weren't able to actually save her. So, what happened here? Ultimately, what I have accepted has happened is Cloud, because of the degradation, is believing that he is able to save Aerith. Meanwhile, Sephiroth is manipulating that and essentially uses that against Cloud, is able to kill Aerith anyways. And it's not as shocking as the original, obviously. It never would have been. We all knew what event was going to end at this game, or what event was going to happen at the conclusion of this game. We knew what was waiting for us. It doesn't change that, man, it hurts. When Aerith, and Matt, I'll let you talk about it, when Aerith collapses over and Cloud is holding on to her and he's just, the tears are falling. Brother, it hurt. It just hurt.
Yeah, and then you had Sephiroth just sitting there bullying Cloud, saying that your tears mean nothing, just going on this rant about, honestly, I can't remember a lot of the stuff that he said. I was just so invested in everything that was going on.
He said not to cry because your tears are empty, just like you. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. He called in that moment when he called him a puppet. Just, man, Sephiroth just has no chill with Cloud, man. There's something I did want to bring up, and I'm pretty sure that you've also seen this in like one of those, explaining exactly what happened with those videos. But there is that flash of a rainbow that happens when, Cloud's weapon meets Sephiroth's, and we do know that the flash of the rainbow basically means that there is a branch timeline that was just created. Now, I do believe what you said about how the degradation and everything that Cloud is going through is causing him to see things a different way, not realizing the actual realistic. But there's also that opportunity that a new timeline where Cloud did save Aerith did happen, but we're not going to know anything for a while, not until
we are not experiencing that timeline, and that's what I was also going to get into is. Yeah. So this is where, and I'm glad you mentioned the rainbow colors, because that is a big part of this as well. We see this when Zack is going after Biggs, or is making his decision whether to go after Biggs or Cloud, or the medicine for Cloud in his timeline. Biggs is trying to bomb the reactor 6, I believe it is. I believe it's reactor 6 is what he's trying to bomb. And the medicine for Cloud in Zack's timeline is with Dr. Hojo. So when Zack makes the choice to go after the medicine, we see that rainbow come out of the tunnel that Biggs, that would have gone towards Biggs, that's another timeline being created. And in the timeline where he went after the medicine for Cloud and the timeline in which he went after Biggs, in both of those timelines,
Yes.
Zack is killed. He is killed in both of them. Now, again, the way to keep up with it all is Stamp, the Shinra mascot, because in the timeline with Zack where he goes after the medicine, Stamp is a furrier dog with a new hat and is a clearly different dog from his timeline. In the timeline where you go after Biggs, he's a pug in a bucket hat. The timeline that actually matters is the one where he goes to help Aerith at the church. Johnny runs by carrying a plushie that is a corgi with a military collar on. So that is how you keep track of all these different timelines. I know that's very confusing. And especially when you're just listening to this and you're not watching it, I can imagine it's very confusing. But I promise this is the best way to keep track of it all. So in that last timeline where Johnny comes by and he's, the one where Zack goes after Aerith at the church, or goes to help Aerith, Sephiroth shows up and kind of knocks Zack into the world between worlds, or the realm between worlds, almost, basically. I know, kind of a God of War kind of thing, or a Star Wars kind of thing. That is also where Cloud was knocked into by Aerith in the Dream World. That's essentially where he was knocked into as well. Now, that'll become relevant in the boss fight, but I want to talk more about the death, because obviously as the rest of the party come into the altar and they see that Sephiroth has killed Aerith, and it's painful, Barrett's screaming that he's going to kill him, and Tifa's just in shock. Like, this is an angry part. I will say, one of the most impactful lines in all of this game, and it is a line that when it's said, I had to pause my game and I had to take a second to kind of just, gain composure back. And it's when it's right before the fight starts, and Sephiroth has had his little tirade about all of the emotions, all of the anger, all of the sorrow. He's feeling it all, and he's feeling it all so keenly, more than ever before. There's this moment with Cloud and Aerith where, again, Cloud is seeing Aerith alive. He is experiencing kind of the reality where he saved her, and she's not saying a word. She's just looking up at him while he's holding her, and Cloud just looks at her, just kind of takes a deep breath and says, I got this.
Just assuring her, that he's going to take down Sephiroth. It was a very good moment.
Yeah. And brother, that line got me. Sorry. That line got me. It's not often a game makes me feel like that. It's not often. It's been a long time since a game has made me feel like that. Sorry.
I'd be lying if I didn't have tears. If I said I didn't have tears.
So he says that because we've seen Cloud through these two games. We've seen him be this cold-hearted soldier, and this is kind of the first time where we've seen him show empathy, and we've seen him show real emotion. And it hits, and it's such a simple line. It's so simple, and it kind of harkens back to her telling him, whatever happens, don't blame yourself. It'll be okay. Exactly. And it's just him saying, hey, don't worry about this. I got this. I'm going to do this. What ensues, now that I've composed myself, is a 10 fucking phase boss fight.
Oh my god.
That is kind of absurd. And at one point, about, I think in the third or fourth phase of the fight, it cuts us back to the kind of the realm between realms where the worlds have kind of converged. And Zack has found Cloud in that realm.
Yep.
And he's like, hey, bud, heard you've been busy. And he kind of taps him on the shoulder. And just like that, they are in the same reality. Even if only for a temporary amount of time, Zack Fair and Cloud Strife are reunited. And they fight Sephiroth together. And it is, oh boy, the cheer that I let out when he touched him. And all of a sudden, they both started moving. And they were both on the battlefield together.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
That was incredible.
It was awesome. Like, this fight was really long, but that moment, Matt, made it all worth it.
Yes. Yeah, finally having Cloud and Zack, fighting together, not just fighting together, but fighting Sephiroth, who is just, the reason why they're all where they're at now. So that fight was one of my things that I loved about that fight, is that it really tested the mastery of all of the characters, because as you are fighting Sephiroth, he's separating you from the other party members, and then they'll come back together. then it's a lot of fun, and it really tests how well your use of your materia, your spells, the synergy. Just incredible moment. Like, I don't think that I would want to do that boss fight anytime soon, but I really liked it. It was probably one of the most epic and most memorable boss fights that I'm going to have for a long time.
Yeah, I'm glad that I don't have to experience that boss fight on my hard playthrough until probably another 70 to 80 hours of playing the game.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
so I will be absolutely ready to fight that boss fight on hard mode to go for the platinum here. Maybe later this year. Maybe later this year. Who knows? Depending on other releases. But the final phase of the fight is also a memorable one. Again, this is where it gets a little confusing because in the last phase of the fight, Cloud is joined after being separated from Zack. Zack is essentially sent back to his own timeline, but he's still fighting this souped-up version of Sephiroth in his timeline at the same time Cloud is. So they're essentially fighting together, but just in different realities. Aerith, or at least I believe the way I've interpreted it is Aerith's spirit accompanies Cloud for the final phase. And there's that classic line of, this is a 3-part thing, and it's you defeat Sephiroth, he starts laughing, Cloud's like, why is he laughing? And Aerith goes, because he knows this isn't over yet. Exactly. He knows this isn't the end. He knows that there's the end game that will be coming in part 3. So you end up fast forwarding back, and there's this great shot of Aerith and Cloud back to back. They're holding hands. They're getting ready to return to reality. And Aerith's like, they're all waiting. We don't want to keep them waiting anymore. And right as Cloud is about to be teleported back, Aerith disappears. Yeah. And it's one of those where it's kind of a reality check of, remember, she is dead. Yeah. She is dead, and he is experiencing them. And I'll give my interpretation of why it is Cloud is seeing her and why he's experiencing all of this. I will give that once we get to the actual full ending here. We're getting there. I know this episode's over an hour long now, so I know that you're wanting us to wrap up. I think this episode's been phenomenal, but we are getting close to the end, so don't worry. You get back to the altar. The party is all they're all crowded around Aerith's body. They're in shock. They're mourning. Cloud gets back, and he has kind of this moment where he's surrounded by all of the white whispers, and he has this moment where he tells Aerith to wake up, and she inexplicably wakes up. You then fast forward. They are on kind of the banks of the lake that's at the altar, which is where, obviously, in the original, Cloud lowered Aerith's body into the lake. I hope that we get a flashback in part 3 where we get to see that, because I hate that we didn't get to see it here. Yeah. But there's this moment that makes it very clear that Cloud is the only one that can see Aerith, because he can see her. Barrett says, hey, we can't stay here forever. We best get moving. And they all get up to leave. Aerith says, I'll see you off. And there's this great shot, or there's this great little sequence of shots where Tifa's the last one to get up. She's not gotten up yet. Cloud turns around. He and Tifa both look at her, and he just goes, Tifa, it's time to go. Tifa gets up, looks at him. It pans back to where Cloud is, and Aerith is no longer there.
Yeah, so that was really well done. Yeah.
So there's a scene with Rufus Shinra in between where he is visited by Glenn Lodbrok, where you are basically told that Sephiroth is using Glenn Lodbrok and is using the Wutai to stoke a lot of this conflict as well. We didn't talk a lot about the war or the ceasefire between the Wutai and Shinra. That is going to be, I'd imagine, at the center of the conflict in part 3. There's only a little bit of it that is discussed here. We see Glenn Lodbrok a lot early on. We see Rufus Shinra a lot early on. And then after about Chapter 4, we don't really see them much after that. So it's revealed. We cut to a field where Sid is repairing the Tiny Bronco, the plane that you've been using. Aerith is kind of walking around the camp, but it's weird because when everyone's talking, they're kind of talking like she's not there. And so it's very clear that you're seeing this perspective through Cloud. Now, one small detail that I know neither of us missed is that while Tifa is crying and Red 13 is comforting her, Aerith puts her hand on Red 13, and he almost feels her presence and says her name out loud. Yeah. He senses her presence. Then, again, like all of this dialogue at the end is great, in my opinion. The one big cliffhanger we are left with is while Cloud also has Aerith's old clear materia, he also still has the black materia. And I believe that means that Sephiroth is still controlling him, and he is ultimately going to have Cloud hand deliver the black materia to him. He ends up meshing it into the Buster Sword, which is crazy. I don't know what that means.
I'm not expecting that at all.
I don't know what that means for the abilities we're going to have at the start of next game, but I can't wait. There's a great conversation between Cloud and Barrett where, he hears in his head the voice of Barrett saying, hey, promise you won't look up. He looks up and he sees the rift in the sky. He tells Barrett and Tifa not to look up, and Barrett says, well, now I have to. He turns around. He doesn't see anything. There's no rift in the sky. So Cloud is seeing multiple realities. He is seeing a reality in which this planet is doomed, but he's also seeing the reality that they still have a little bit of time. He then lets them know that, hey, let's go after Sephiroth. He's hiding up north, Soldier's intuition. And that is where Sephiroth is charging himself up with Genova cells to reach his final form. That is likely what the final conflict of the third game will be. And Barrett has a great line of, just remember, we have got everything riding on this, and that's a load you best be ready to carry. And I love that. Because Barrett has been the one carrying the load for Avalanche for 2 games now. He tells them in Remake early on, I'm here, I've got, I can carry all your pain, I can carry all your hopes, I can carry all of that for you. I'm here to take that load off your shoulders. He is finally telling Cloud, that is a load you best be prepared to carry because Barrett has been there before. He has understood what it's like to carry the weight of all of so many people relying on him. And now Cloud is carrying that all as well. Finally, we have one more interaction with Cloud and Aerith. He makes sure that she's going to be okay getting back, so to say. I'm doing air quotes. You can't really see them, but I'm doing air quotes. I am interpreting that as Aerith is going to be returning to the live stream, at which in the third game, she will have to bargain with the planet to cast Holy to create a barrier to stop the meteor, like in the original. They talk about, how, it's like a second home to her. And finally, she promises to stop the meteor. Cloud promises to stop Sephiroth. The tiny Bronco leaves, and we are left with a shot of Aerith watching the plane fly away as her song from Loveless plays. She says goodbye, and we are left with the message, no promises await at Journey's End. Ladies and gentlemen, that is the ending of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, and I would like a little bit of an applause because I was able to get through all of that, because there is a lot of shit that I have to remember there. So, honest interpretation of it all, Matt, and I'll let you give your thoughts, and then we will wrap this episode up because it's well over an hour long at this point. Aerith obviously is only being seen by Cloud. Yes. Nobody else can see her. Our thought process is those who have a strong relationship with the live stream can at the very least feel her presence in Red 13's case. In Cloud's case, because of the degradation, because of the Mako that he has had put into his system, he can see her because of how in touch with the live stream he is. Now, I don't know what that means for Aerith's presence in the third game. I'd imagine she will still be a very big presence, I'd imagine. But it is a very emotional send-off that, again, when Aerith says goodbye with that song playing, man, tears.
Absolutely.
Tears because, man, 2 games have been building to this. They've been building to this moment where she is killed tragically, and it's her saying goodbye because she knows that her part in their story and in the story of that party specifically, her part in that story is done. Now her part to play is saving the planet. And that is something that she has to do outside of the party. She cannot do it with them still. So it's a very, very convoluted ending, and I can imagine you've probably rolled your eyes every time I feel like I've tried to make sense of it. But I want to say, this is absolutely my favorite game that I have played since Elden Ring. And yes, the ending is convoluted, but I think this game is a 10 out of 10. I think it's a masterpiece of an action RPG. I think it's going to be a really long wait until part 3. I do think that Square kind of wrote themselves into a corner using Reunion for the Crisis Core remaster title. However, I do think they could use Reunion again and keep it with like the remake, Rebirth, Reunion. I do think another great title that they might go with, because of how often this word is said, I think Final Fantasy VII Homecoming is a very likely title for Part 3. So on March 24th, 2024 at 8:58 p.m., I want you guys to mark down that I said that. So if that is what's announced, I said it first. Matt, what were your overall thoughts on the ending? I know it's a lot to unpack. Just what are your overall thoughts? And again, tell me, how do you think I did interpreting it?
Interpreting it, I think you did a phenomenal job. Like, that was extremely impressive, and I'm very proud of you for the research that you did, for just being able to remember everything, because there's just a lot to take in with this game. And then, to me, honestly, now you are right on the money. You know, what happened in the original game that is still what the set path is, and Sephiroth knows that, and that's why he's doing what he is doing. Is he has to prevent any type of defeat he may suffer, no matter what timeline it is. His whole entire goal is to become that god of all, basically what you said, the multiverse. And I'm extremely looking forward to, once we go up to the north and we go through, like, what's to come. Like, honestly, at this point, I don't know what they're going to add. I don't know what they're going to leave out, but I'm very excited for Part 3. I definitely can't predict what's going to happen, just with how many twists and turns that Rebirth has done. And honestly, I cannot wait. Like, this is probably one of those times where I have not looked forward to a sequel since Endgame. Like, this is honestly the endgame of video games for me right here.
No, I agree 100%. I think that everything with how this game is handled, the story that's told, the combat, the gameplay, the side content, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is my front runner for Game of the Year right now. And of all the games that are announced and that are already out, whether it be Power World, Helldivers, what have you, I think this is the clear and obvious favorite for Game of the Year right now. And it absolutely should be. And I just want to say one more time, because I did this for Charlotte McBurney when A Plague Tale Requiem came out, and I said, hey, best performance, she 100% deserves it. Brianna White for Aerith Gainsborough, I really hope that she gets a best performance nomination from all this.
Me too.
Because she was absolutely phenomenal. She was amazing in the first game, and she somehow topped that in this game. So, Brianna White, phenomenal job. The entire cast, phenomenal job. I loved this game. I can't wait to keep playing it and go for the platinum. It's going to take a lot of time, but I'm excited for that grind. There's going to be some rage. There's going to be some rage in all likelihood. But I'm excited to go back for it, because this was just such a fantastic journey from beginning to end. And if you haven't played Remake or Rebirth, you owe it to yourself to play some of the greatest games that have come out since this generation began. It's two phenomenal games. So it's been a long episode, Matthew, but I think it's been a great one. I think we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. So that is going to do it for this episode of Side Mission. Be sure to check us out on Twitter at Side Mission Pod. You can follow us on Facebook as well at Side Mission Podcast. For Matt Beck, for Kyle Lynch in the producer's chair, I'm Rusty Ellis. Thanks for listening.